Are you ready for an impossible question? Who is the best Survivor player ever? Not most entertaining or most important, just the best at playing the game. Trust me, it is a hard question, and there are many up for contention. To me, these top players all have arguments for being crowned the best. So let's go through each case and ask the question, are they the best Survivor? Of all the candidates I can go over for the best Survivor, Sandra might be the most difficult, and at the same time, the most simple one to make the case for. On paper, she had a resume that stood for 39 seasons of the show as an unbeatable one-of-one achievement. Sandra came on to Survivor in Season 7, Pearl Islands, and finished as the sole survivor of the season, which for many viewers already puts you in contention as one of the greatest survivors to ever play. 13 seasons later, on Heroes vs. Villains, Sandra comes back and wins her second million. In one of the most beloved and hyped of seasons, on one of the most star-studded casts, this little potty-mouthed lady found a way to get all the way to the end and be the sole survivor yet again. In a game where returning winners are immediately targeted as massive threats, this is an incredible achievement. Her title as the only two-time winner stood until a season of all returning winners was introduced, effectively ending the record no matter what happened. Even then, the player who won that season, Tony, needed a second season between his two winning ones to fumble the game and reduce his target for Winners at War. Every other returning player who you can think of, any great you can put a name on that returned for a second time, failed to do what Sandra did. It is a fact that Sandra's two back-to-back wins immediately put her in the GOAT conversation for Survivor. On the other hand, this is in fact Sandra we're talking about. Now, I love Sandra, and I know it sounds pretty rude, but at first glance, she seems to have zero of the qualities the best Survivor players hold. So far in my series, my two other candidates for best ever have been domineering, physically fit alpha males, and you would be hard-pressed to find any other player as opposed to them as Sandra. She's at worst a challenged liability who warms the sit-out bench, and in her two post-mergers has not once won individual immunity. She isn't some all-controlling godfather, and she isn't exactly the master of the idle play. She speaks her mind and gets into fights with her tribe mates. Winners are supposed to be threats to the game, but looking at all of this, maybe you can see the perspective of some. Is she really ever an actual threat, or did she just luck out? What I have just outlined is the polarizing debate about Sandra that seems to follow her around. Because if you're invested in Survivor like I am, there's a huge chance you either think Sandra is one of, if not the best to ever play, or flat out one of the worst winners who had an amazing fate of winning twice. Clearly, since this video is arguing for Sandra being the best, I'll stick with the former position in this video. But I'll even let you know I have gone back and forth continuously about ranking Sandra as legendary or middling. I've thought about this a lot, and I will try my hardest in this video to convince you Sandra is the best, but I will not pretend she's your standard fantastic player. What Sandra really is maybe the most unorthodox, unique player the game has ever seen. Season 7 of Survivor is probably the most engaging and chaotic of the early seasons. Sandra famously begins the season helping her tribe out by bargaining with the local villagers in Spanish. She becomes a key part of Rupert's Drake tribe alliance, which gets her all the way to the merge. But that alliance is shattered by the third vote of the merge. This is due to some major shenanigans. For one, the unprecedented twist occurs of having two people who were previously voted out re-enter the game. Additional mischief ensues due to the scheming of one Johnny Fairplay, in my eyes one of the most underrated strategists of the early game, and one of the great Sandra bickering partners. In large part due to the outcasts and Fairplay, Rupert is blindsided, and the Drake alliance crumbles, as John and the outcasts slowly take over. Oh, but Sandra still wins. What? Yeah, even with her alliance crumbling, and placed in arguably the most chaotic post-merge the game had seen up to that point, Sandra still makes it to the end and wins handily, 6-1. Oh well, clearly she can't repeat a run like that again. 6 years later, Sandra returns to the Villains tribe of the universally lauded Season 20 of the show, Heroes vs. Villains, where once more she is met with some unprecedented and chaotic 39 days, a game-changing strategist, and Rupert. This time, she ingrains herself in Boston Rob's villain alliance in the early pre-merge, before once more disorder ensues. Russell Hance happens, using hidden immunity idols like no one ever has before to destroy Rob's alliance, and eventually take out the Rob father himself, all before the merge. Sandra appears to be down for the count, relegated to the perimeter of the villain's tribe along with the fellow challenge beast, Courtney Yates, where she once more bickers with another squat little man for remaining time in the game.
Are you with me or are you against me?
I'm against you, Russell.
The merge ensues, and just like at the villain's beach, through some all-time great idol play, the heroes roll over one by one to Russell. Seems like Hance and Parvati are all but unstoppable. Oh, and then Sandra wins again, 6-3. How does this keep happening? Is it really luck that Sandra, in some of the most chaotic seasons we've seen, beginning already in poor circumstances due to her lacking challenge abilities and emphasized by her alliances continuously collapsing, wins not once, but 2 times? Lightning does not strike twice, but Sandra does. Yes, the haters will say, she really is that lucky. Like right here. For those that don't know, in the final challenge of Pearl Islands, Johnny Fairplay has to win one more challenge against Lil and Sandra to guarantee himself immunity and kick Sandra out. John is not a challenge threat, but against them, he's an Olympic athlete. Of course, the final challenge is all about squatting, the one thing Lil is good at. Wishy-washy Lil wins and very much in character, stabs Fairplay in the back and essentially hands Sandra the million, the contest being so one-sided due to said compulsive backstabbing. If the challenge was based around anything else except squatting, Sandra doesn't win. Oh, and look at heroes versus villains, right here. Jerry is less than half a second away from winning this immunity. If that happens, Sandra is out instead of Jerry in the final 4. Maybe if you're a real Survivor nerd, you know that even with her translation help, Sandra was still probably the first to go out on the Drake tribe if they lose the first challenge. Which, by the way, the Drake tribe wins by this much. No more than a couple yards. If the Morgan team never hits a bit of muddy sand, Sandra Diaz-Twine, potential best survivor ever candidate, is the first player voted out of her very first season. You know, a wise man once said, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. And that's what I'm hearing here. These are all hypothetical situations that never happened. Who's to say they know if X, Y, and Z didn't happen, Sandra would have no chance of winning? Even without squats, women usually win the balance and focus-heavy final challenges of the first 7 seasons. In season 20, no matter who gets immunity, Sandra is pretty safe considering Russell and Jerry saw her as a goat to bring to the end. In fact, Jerry winning probably means Parvati goes in her place, and from what we know, Jerry does not beat Sandra in a final tribal council scenario. And with the possibility of her getting out first, seriously, can you really call yourself a great survivor if you weren't close to getting out first in your winning season? Also, why would Sandra just roll over and die? She has the ability to scramble and get the vote off of her, so why wouldn't she in this scenario? Hypotheticals and calling out Sandra's challenge luck only take you so far. Let's talk about all of the most obvious moments where she lacked luck. Season 7, Episode 13. John and Burton seem to be wrapping the season up. One of the 3 women is going home next. While John and Burton are off for a reward, Sandra guides Dara and Lil to begin flipping on the boys, once more preying on Lil and Dara's wishy-washy behavior. As the men get back to camp, she pretends to have given up on the game as they had predicted, setting up the spectacular blindside of Burton. Fast forward to Season 20, Episode 8. The villains' tribe lose in a disappointing fashion to the heroes, with Sandra's close ally Courtney being the main target due to her lackluster challenge performance. Courtney seems like the obvious choice, except for the fact Sandra has been convincing Russell that Coach Wade is out to get him, as an act of vengeance for voting out his ally Rob. Russell, in his paranoia, believes Sandra for the most part, and even though Coach is completely fine with voting out Courtney to keep the tribe strong, he is instead blindsided, and Sandra's ally is saved. And never mind the unfortunate circumstance of having her alliances crumble around her and being forced to play from the bottom, one of the hardest situations a player can get themselves into. But no, Doubters will tell you that actually being at the bottom helped Sandra. She just got to sit on the sidelines while the bigger threats were taken out. In fact, if Russell had gone out just like Sandra wanted, she surely would have lost. That bitter jury hated Russell and his allies so much they would have voted for anyone instead of them. So no Russell equals no Sandra win. The first thing to address here is this. Why are you bringing hypotheticals again, man? Why are we automatically assuming that taking a far easier road would have meant absolute death for Sandra? We've seen this woman adapt to every crappy situation the game threw at her. Why would it be so hard for her to want to walk the straightforward path to victory? Secondly, let's talk about this bitter jury which purportedly handed Sandra the win unfairly. No matter what video you watch from me, I will never admit that a bitter jury is a thing, mainly because it isn't. The jury is the end-all be-all of the game of Survivor. Being judged by your peers and taking care of the way they see you are baked into the very essence of the game. Saying a jury can be bitter or wrong is like saying a basketball is wrong when you miss a shot. Ball don't lie, and neither does a jury. Finally, sitting on the sidelines is a very diminishing term for the skill that might be the most important to the entire game: threat level management. There are debates for who is the best challenge beast or mastermind in Survivor history, but Sandra is without a doubt the greatest threat manager the game has ever seen. In her entire season, Sandra, who had all but one person write her name down on day 39, logged exactly 0 votes against her the previous 38 days. In the second season, now with the revered distinction as a returning winner, she logged a whopping 3 votes against her. Now's a good time to bring up Sandra's other appearances. Sandra returned for 2 more appearances as a player and once as a giant stone head, but for those player appearances, you would think a 2-time winner would be dead in the water immediately. Her target would just be too big to bear, and an appearance after the first vote for her tribe would be a miracle. But this is Sandra, so are you even surprised when I tell you she survived until day 16 both times, controlling the tribe and outlasting multiple players from her own along the way? Yeah, sure, day 16 is not exactly a long run, especially pre-shortened seasons, but anything past day 3 for a 2-time winner should be looked at with bafflement. As well, both times Sandra got out on some pretty iffy terms. For those latter 2 seasons, she was relatively safe until the Jeff Probst special, a lopsided tribe swap, which completely obliterated her chances of surviving in season 35, Game Changers. In season 40, a more fair swap occurred, but Sandra was the target of a pretty controversial idol play that lots of people argued was a dumb move on the idol player's part that Sandra couldn't have predicted. To me, I think it still stands that Sandra's threat level management is of a caliber of its own. Her unmatched ability to sneak under the radar, allowing anyone but her to be the target of the episode, and the episode after that, and so on until it's only her, does wonders, and that's why she won twice. It also very much contrasts with the other great players of Survivor history, who command groups of people or pull ingenious idol tricks to stay afloat. The contrast between these greats and Sandra is what makes her unique, but also uniquely unappreciated by some fans. For me, I feel the Survivor community at large uses completely conceptual ideas and phrases to judge a player's ability, phrases that unintentionally undervalue Sandra. You can look at her game and say 1,000 things. What are her physical, social, and strategic skills? Does she have agency in the game? Does she control a voting block? Does she really have jury management? Can she outwit, outplay, outlast? Look, I use a lot of these terms as well. But do you really think this is the kind of stuff they were talking about during that first season in Borneo? Just for once, throw away these buzzwords about how a proper winner should play and look at the pure, primordial essence of becoming sole survivor. Getting to the end and winning over the jury. That's it. And whose game better fits these simple parameters than Sandra? Let's look at an example of how using Survivor vocab overlooks Sandra's unique winning abilities. In Heroes vs. Villains, a lot of people critique her for having little voting power and never being able to vote out Russell Hantz, even though she attempted to orchestrate a plan throughout the post-merge. Let's give her more context to this situation, however. Yes, Sandra could not gather the remaining heroes to vote against Russell. What she did do, however, is use her open scheming against him to her advantage at the very end. She survived to the final tribal council, where she proved that she was the only remaining villain who had actively stood against Russell, something all the heroes, who were now out and hated the way Russell treated them, respected dearly. Sandra showed she had separated herself from Russell's alliance, something not even the great Parvati could do. All of this, leveraging your failed strategy as a way to win, does not fall under any one word or skill Survivor nerds use, but it still works. I think Sandra is actually filled with a lot of these intangibles. She's very aware of others, is able to spot problem players early on, a master of picking at social cracks between people to stir the pot, etc., etc. Sandra's playstyle is so simple, it's stupid. Call it under the radar or effective jury management or whatever, but simply put, in a game called Survivor, Sandra is the best at surviving. Until she held the biggest target on her back the game has ever seen, Sandra could survive to the end and get the jury to like her over the remaining survivors. That's all you need to win. And really, winning is all that matters, especially in Survivor. Think about it. We are seeing the smallest slice of a season, about a whole month of contestants playing boiled down to 13 40-minute episodes. We as fans really know nothing about the success of a player. The only real evidence we have of a truly successful player, something the editors can't cut out or warp, is that winning tally. So who are we to say that Sandra isn't the best player? Why question if she really is great, when the only concrete evidence we have points to a resounding yes? Not to sound like a broken record, but she has won twice, back to back, across multiple eras of the show. In looking at the modern seasons, which seem to heavily favor under the radar and non-domineering winners, do you think a newbie Sandra plopped in the contemporary games would do anything else but completely dominate? Her game style could work in any era of the show. Under the worst conditions, Sandra would still find a way to win in her own unique way. So when asking who is the best survivor, the survivor who has the greatest odds of winning it all, give me a player who can back that claim up with real results. Give me the queen. Give me Sandra Diaz-Twine.
You know what? I can get loud too. What the